Welcome to this special interview on the Banega Swasth India. We have with us Parnasha Banerjee. She is the Associate Director Urban Wash at Dasra, which has been doing some credible work on menstruation, sanitation, and hygiene. Thank you so much, Parnasha, for joining us today.
Thank you, Ambika. It's a pleasure to be here.
Parnasha, with Menstruation Day around the corner, and when we're talking about menstrual hygiene, what really is the connect between menstruation and sanitation?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think thanks, Sambika, for bringing out a very important question, right? Like we've been thinking about sanitation and the work that we've done across the sanitation value chain. And what we realized that inclusion and inclusivity across the sanitation value chain has become an important part for all of us. And within which I think menstrual hygiene plays a very critical role. One, of course, is in the form of, like when we do have toilets and when we have community toilets and people, women, girls, men, of course, access public and community toilets, there is a huge focus, or there is a lack of actually menstrual hygiene facilities in some of these toilets, right? And even if they are there, they are not up to the standards that women and girls are able to use this.
Sure.
There's, of course, a huge focus around disposal, right? Like as incomes and awareness levels have increased or risen, more menstruators in India have started using sanitary pads. We've seen that sanitary pads have actually kind of reached what we call as the first mile, right? And this in turn has actually led to an increase in the menstrual waste. And menstrual waste, again, we've for ages kind of understood that how do we kind of classify them? Are they environmental? Do we classify them as products, as biomedical waste, etc.? And then that's been a debate for over the years, right? And there are current practices of disposal around in community toilets, in public toilets, and often in even in your individual household toilets, right? And how they are basically disposed of. And then there are again those desired practices of disposal. While I talk about MHM across the sanitation value chain, one important thing to understand is that our service providers, right, who are our sanitation workers, and two important things around them, right? One is the fact that they are exposed to
time and again
products, right? Time and again. And it is, of course, infectious. It's not, and when I say infectious, it has risks to their health, etc. Right? That's one. And the second thing is their own menstrual hygiene needs, right? Like most of these sanitation workers, they work in certain uniform, right? They have a certain, they do have to wear certain personal protective equipments. Again, we haven't penetrated fully across on how many sanitation workers do wear personal protective equipments and the proper ones. But when there are women and when there are actually like them wearing personal protective equipments, there's a huge issue around menstrual hygiene, right? I would only imagine what they would be, how uncomfortable they would be wearing those, right? So I think that's another thing in how do we look at the safety of these sanitation workers who have access and who are actually kind of also menstruating while they're doing this job for us.
Yeah. In fact, could you tell us what are the key steps needed to improve menstrual hygiene in India?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think a couple of things, right? One is the fact that there is, I would say that awareness has kind of, with Bollywood coming in and with a lot of these advertisements, etc., media talking about it, I think there's been an up, right, in terms of the awareness and in terms of people understanding about menstrual hygiene, the need for menstrual hygiene. But I don't think that we have yet broken the taboo around it, right? I still see like chemist shops selling menstrual hygiene products wrapped in newspaper and black polythene, etc.
So the taboo is still there. We need to break that.
There is social stigma and there is taboo, right? We still feel uncomfortable talking about menstrual hygiene within our family as well, with men around, with like our with fathers and boyfriends and husbands, etc. Right? It's still an uncomfortable kind of a conversation, right? I think the second thing would be access to menstrual hygiene. Like I mentioned, that there is a huge penetration of sanitary pads now, right? And then that also is leading to disposal issues. But however, I think there's also to kind of think about that there are affordable menstrual hygiene products that ensures women's health, and they need to be also taken out right there, right? Like, in fact, there are cloth menstrual pads that actually work very well and they kind of inhibit fungal and bacterial growth, thereby reducing a lot of the symptoms that women undergo. But I don't think that we talk about them enough, about actually the right to choices, right? As a woman, Yeah, that as a woman that we do have we have choice, and that choice unfortunately remains limited to the privileged part of the community or privileged part of the society, and that doesn't generally penetrate in, in someone who might actually need, or who should be made aware of, the kind of products or the basket of products that are available. I think the training of stakeholders, right? The third being that, right? Like when there are so many health workers that we are working with. There are people who are actually working with, teachers, education systems and education institutions, and then even in fact, for that matter, government officials, right? Like when we talk about government, and especially we still don't know where menstrual hygiene sits in the larger ministry, in the larger conversation of the ministry, and a lot of ministries have done a fantastic job, like the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs came up with a gender guidelines for Swachh Bharat Mission Urban, right, which does talk about menstrual hygiene in its like guidelines. But I think just understanding how that goes to the cities and the states and at a local
level, last mile access, reaches each one.
And how the ULBs, how are each of those ULBs, and how are each of the ULBs while talking to communities while talking to ULBs across their needs on MHM. That training, I think, still needs to be kind of taken forward. And I think a large part of this is actually probably stigma. Right, like
I think so. For most important, Parnasha, is I think we break the stigma. We talk about it, like you said, these uncomfortable conversations. We break through that, and then once we start talking awareness, and then we reach on to the choices and of course trainings, and we move forward. But Parnasha, just moving on a little bit about to talk about sanitation. According to UNICEF globally, 2.3 billion people lack basic sanitation services, and in least developed countries, only 27% of the population has a hand washing facility with soap and water at all times at home. How does this affect a girl's life, and what can India do to really overcome this challenge?
Yeah. No, I think, Ambika, very important question. Creating an enabling environment in schools and in communities. I think leveraging community leaders, be it in urban slums, be it in rural, I think is the most critical step in actually ensuring that some of these basic sanitation services and hygiene practices are available, even in fact water and soap at home. In fact, in many states and cities and communities, if you actually leverage local leaders, sometimes even girls, like who actually are community leaders, who go and who are basically looking at the challenges at a sanitation facility, or at like a toilet where there is a lack of water, where there is a lack of hygiene practice, and take some of these challenges to actually say community leaders or community people who are taking decisions in the communities, for them to then voice it to their local authorities, right? Like a large part of this would be if you do actually increase the access in some of these very marginalized communities, I do think that there is a lot of development that can happen in some of these households, in some of these communities. So I think one is just creating that enabling environment in schools, right? In schools and in communities, where community leaders can come forward, work with local authorities to be able to address these problems, right? And I think the second thing, an outcome of this is that, like, when you do talk about, and when we do have schools, I think just making sure that the facilities in schools are adequate and are safe for women to be able to use. In fact, not just schools, I would say any public place, right? There are malls that we go to, there are like villages, and there are village community centers that people go to, the community centers that we go to. In fact, just making sure that toilets are usable and something that women are able to access. I think that's just an important step. And then that actually would require a lot of awareness in these groups as to why this is important, why this actually leads to a larger, hygiene and better sanitation for your own community, wherever you could be, right?